Hi, I'm Dr. David Purvis. Welcome to the first of this Office Hours series. And so I'm doing answers to your questions. So what's happened is that people have sent me questions through the week, and I have selected a number of questions to answer in video format. So today I'm talking about worry, generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD as it's called, tinnitus, and chronic sweating. And I'm also including blushing, trembling, and other kind of physiologically based problems that are kind of troubling in social situations. So it basically works like this. You send a question to selfhelpcbt@gmail.com, and if I'm able, I will make a video answer to that question. So let's proceed. So this is the first question. I get anxiety real bad, but when I have it, sometimes I can't breathe and my heart races. What can I do when it gets that bad? Thank you for the opportunity to explore with you an issue that is hugely concerning for me. Well, we're talking about anxiety, and we're going to talk about anxiety as we go through this video, and even worry as well, of course. But my first thought is let's not let the anxiety get to the point where it's hard to breathe and your heart races. If that's the case, what's happened is you're overwhelmed with physiological activation. So basically you're on the verge, let's say, of a panic attack where your activation is really, really high. So as a general principle, I would always advocate, let's work to eradicate anxiety so you don't get to the point where you have problems with breathing and your heart racing. But having said that, if you get to that point, there are a few things that we can do in answer to your question. I'm a big fan of putting your face in cold water, putting your hands in cold water, putting your feet in cold water, giving your body an actual physiological shock through coldness. It's a great way of taking your attention away from the problem that you have and allocating it somewhere else, which is actually tangible to your brain, if you like. All anxiety problems, in a sense, are created in here because they're problems really linked to imagination. And when you give yourself a physiological shock, then it tends to bring you back to what we might call reality. The other thing that you can do is to do a little sort of a task which distracts you from the problem that you have. So I would say to someone, okay, find 5 things that are red in the room that you're in. Find 4 things that are green. Find 3 things that are blue. Find 2 things that are black. Find 1 thing that's orange. It doesn't matter what the colors are, but it gets your attention and it makes it necessary for you to be able to focus, and that takes some of the attention away from the anxiety symptoms. So as we go through this, I'm going to talk about Anxiety Wizard because I can't help it really, because the answers to these problems are typically within Anxiety Wizard, so it would be remiss of me not to mention it. So a little bit later on, I'll talk a little bit more about anxiety. So that was the first question. And just generally, I'd say let's not get to the point of really having amplified anxiety. Now, this is a question about worry. How do I stop being so worried all the time, panic over silly things? COVID really frightened me. Now, this is a really interesting question because it's the thinking part of anxiety. So I often think of anxiety as being a very physiologically based problem, but your brain has to make sense of the experience, and so it gives you worry. Worry is your attempt to understand, explain, and make sense of what's happening to you. So what is worry? Right, your brain is always trying to solve problems. You are a problem solver. You solve many, 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 many tens of thousands of problems throughout your life. A problem could be as simple as, shall I buy some more toothpaste? What shall I have for dinner? Okay, so your brain always expects to solve problems. Now, if you set your brain a problem that does not have an answer, it will continue to try and solve the problem. And that, in principle, is worry. You're setting your brain a task it cannot achieve. Your brain does not know that because it expects to be able to achieve solutions to problems. And so it continues to try and solve the problem. So as an example, if I was worried about when I would die, so when will I die? I'm really worried about dying. When will I die? When will I find out? Well, the answer, of course, is in the future. I will find out when I die, But yeah, but what if the plane crashes? Well, when will you find out if the plane crashes? You'll find out in the future. So if it's really important for you to understand when the plane's going to crash or when you're going to die, You simply cannot answer those questions because the answer is in the future. So basically, just in a nutshell, worry is asking your brain to solve a problem that it can't solve, or answer a question that does not have an answer, which makes worry entirely futile. There's a nice little short course inside Anxiety Wizard which gives you loads of worry tools that you can use to stop worrying, and it's not that hard. It's just about the application of the tools. So how to deal with generalized anxiety disorder? So a question is this: GAD, an over-awareness of every pain or body sensation as being something serious, high anxiety, thought of going to doctors and having tests, etc. So this is generalized anxiety disorder, but it's also really speaking about health anxiety. So generalized anxiety disorder is really just another name for anxiety. If you were to be assessed by a psychologist, they would assess you for generalized anxiety disorder. So let's think about what anxiety and what generalized anxiety disorder is. I've got this little helpful kind of list, if you like. I think of there being 5 doors to anxiety. And this answer speaks to the question in a sense, right? So you go through doors, you can come back through doors. If you go through these doors, you will be anxious. And many people go through 2 or 3, maybe all of these doors on their journey to anxiety. The first door is this: there's almost always an over-attention to physical symptoms. So what happens is you pay a lot of attention to what your body's doing, more so than if someone wasn't anxious. That then amplifies the symptoms and it magnifies them, and we'll be speaking about that when we come to sweating. The second thing is you don't know you do this, but you confuse worry with real problem solving. So you think, well, you may think that worrying about something is a constructive problem solving strategy. A large proportion of people think that. It's not the case. Worry is trying to answer a question that does not have an answer, whereas a real problem solving is actually solving a problem. A third door is intolerance of uncertainty. And now what this means is that you require a certainty of life that just doesn't exist. As an example, for instance, your chance of dying today is approximately 1 in 1 million. Now, that's not very big, but it's just that it's a small amount of risk in many things, and you just can't eliminate that risk. So if you're intolerant of that risk, and if you're intolerant of not knowing what's going to happen next, that makes you prone to anxiety and in particular worry. Now, I once had a client, she said, "Oh, catastrophe is a journey I go on every day." So catastrophic thinking is a very big characteristic of anxiety, because you magnify the risk and turn it into a catastrophe, and then you bring that catastrophe back to the present moment, and then you experience that catastrophe as if it was real, until your attention is taken somewhere else and you forget about it. And finally, avoidance of people, places, activities and things. A big characteristic of anxiety is that we avoid things we're frightened of. Now, I've known people who end up basically living in their bedroom because they're frightened of being elsewhere or anywhere else, outside their house, on the street. I've known people that couldn't walk on a pavement because they were so anxious and fearful. But the house is safe, the pavement's pretty safe, even driving's pretty safe. It does have some risk. So avoidance means that you never actually have to deal with the problem as it is, because you're always avoiding imaginary threats. So those are the 5 doors to anxiety. If you're interested in learning more about them, you'll find a video that's quite popular on YouTube called The 5 Doors to Anxiety by me. And it just explains these a little bit more. Now here's the thing, you go through these doors to become anxious. You can come back through these doors if you want to stop being anxious. And that's just about learning the processes by which we stop going through these doors. It's like using the tools, really. Now, I've done a feedback loop here, which kind of talks about generalized anxiety disorder, health anxiety. But it applies really to all anxious situations. So we start off, look, you expect a problem. So we have an expectancy. that primes you, that makes you physiologically aroused because you're expecting a problem. You worry about it. Certainly if it hasn't happened yet, you worry about it. What will happen if I go to work? You look for it and you expect it. And when you look for something and expect it, you often find it. So you start to feel that your heart rate is going a bit higher, your pulse is going a bit higher. In the context of sweating, you start to know that you're feeling hot. Whatever the symptom is, the physical symptom, you focus your attention on it, and that magnifies it. What you focus your attention on, you get more of. And that confirms your expectation that you have a problem. And that reinforces the deeper core negative belief that you have. And so we have a loop. And if you see the little kind of spirally thing going down there, it goes round like a whirlpool. I always think of it as a whirlpool. It goes round and round and round until it gets so bad you probably have to run away or escape in some way. So that's a very, very common feedback loop in all anxiety problems. Now here's a question. I suffer from excessive sweating, and this is making my life a misery. I'm a senior manager for an international company, and it scares me to think ahead of future meetings with other executives, especially in the summer and in venues not well ventilated where I may have to shake hands or make presentations and clearly show my perspiration under my arms, on my trousers, between my legs, etc. I believe I've had this condition from birth, and no matter what my wife and family tell me, it's a minor issue. Everybody perspires. People do not value an individual's worth by their bodily functions, etc. It continues to concern me to the extent that it consumes a great deal of my thinking in a negative spiral way. I'm keen to use self-help as much as I can, and to do that I've been taking cold showers, I've been wearing thinner clothing, short trousers when at home, turning the heating down, opening windows, etc. I can just about keep this concern under control when I'm in a friendly environment. And where I have control of the conditions, lockdown has been supporting in this respect, working mainly from home and not having to confront superiors or peers. I dread when the lockdown is over and I'll once again be in environments where I will not have so much control, and especially in the summer. So this is, let's call it pathological sweating or excessive sweating. This question, we could substitute sweating for blushing and trembling. So it's a physiological problem to a large degree. However, it actually has quite a good psychological solution. So I'm adding tinnitus in with this as well because it's actually quite pertinent. Now, sweating, blushing, tinnitus, trembling are problems which sometimes are worse and sometimes are not so bad. They're more or they're less, which tells us that they're movable, that they move around a little bit in the sense that they have a volume control. So the question we ask then, what is it that affects the volume control? Because what we don't want to do is to turn the volume of these things down. And I've worked with all of these problems in clinical practice, and they're all amenable to a kind of a CBT solution. So I've drawn another drawing here. So this one starts off with anticipatory fear. So for this gentleman, he is anticipating a problem. So before he even starts, before he goes anywhere, he's anticipating having a problem, and he's anticipating having a problem in the domain of fear. So it's the emotion of fear. Now, when you are activating the emotion of fear, you're activating the fight or flight system. And so what happens is your body becomes prepared to do something pretty extreme, and the extreme thing that's trying to do is to ensure your survival. And so sweating is a cooling activity, and so it might be that you start to activate the physiology of cooling. Now, sweating is also to a large degree a catecholamine based disorder, in the sense that it's activating catecholamine neurotransmitters and hormones, and so that activates adrenaline and cortisol. Now, anticipatory fear creates a sense of anxiety, it creates a feeling of anxiety, and it creates a process of worry. What if I sweat and people can notice it? What will they think of me? This is catastrophic, of course. We end up in the situation where we're at work or something like that, and it activates the negative belief. So it could be the sun coming through the window activates the negative belief. And what you do then is that you monitor yourself. So you increase your self-awareness, and you look for a problem that you previously anticipated. This gives you a bodily activation, and that makes you stressed, which activates the stress response. A stress response is not neutral, it's not placid, it's not relaxed. It's an activated stress response, and therefore your body will be activated. But you're interpreting it in a way that makes you vulnerable. You're not just saying I'm stressed, you're saying I'm stressed and this will make me vulnerable because people will see, which enhances that stress fear response, which increases the sense of anxiety over the problem. And again, we have a feedback loop. And so what we want to do really with this is we want to think about how to withdraw ourselves from it. Stress and anxiety have a habit of sucking you into them so that you feel closer and closer to the problem, and you feel that you have less and less tools and resources. And what we want to do is to actually enable you to step back from the problem. Now, all of this on this drawing, the anticipatory fear and the enhanced stress and fear response, is entirely created in your brain. And we want to get to a situation where we don't create an enhanced stress and fear response, which will then pretty much give you the best sort of experience that you can have, and it will be pretty much like everybody else's experience. So what the research has shown has that a course of CBT, where we're working on anxiety, worry, and stress, and also debunking false negative beliefs, coupled with a concentration training technique where we focus our attention on something, thereby taking our attention away from the body activation and increased self-awareness. So in principle, we want less self-awareness and we want more engagement in whatever it is that's going on. And we also want to be able to negate the negative beliefs we have about ourselves and in that situation so that we reduce the overall stress response. Now, if we look at this picture here, we have high arousal, we have low arousal, we have optimal arousal. When we're talking about sweating, blushing, trembling, and tinnitus, we're moving into a high arousal zone. Now, high arousal is it's a maladaptive and problematic state. We don't want to be in low arousal because we'll be feeling a bit sort of sleepy and a bit relaxed. We want to be in optimal arousal, and we call the gap between these two the window of tolerance. So what we want to do, particularly with respect to the sweating, is I would say to you, okay, when you go to work, how stressed are you? 0, not at all, 10 is as bad as it could be. And then I would use the stress monitoring diary, and over a period of weeks, we would work using tools to reduce your arousal, your stress in principle, and bring it down and down to the optimal arousal zone. And in doing so, you start to get some distance from the problem, and you start to see the problem as a thing to work on. And I would recommend that you look for a video of mine called "I am not the problem, but I have a problem." Right now, you would say, "I am the problem. I sweat, I am the problem." And I would like to change that to, "I have a problem with sweating, but I am not the problem." Okay? I am not the problem, but I have a problem, and that is sweating. So we would work to bring the stress down. That will give significant, very, very significant results on any kind of physiologically based problem. It would also work well for stress. I often use this for stress and just anxiety generally, because all anxiety and stress related problems all involve an abnormally high arousal, physiological arousal for the situation that you're in. That has to be managed. Now, all psychological problems have causes and cures, and I've talked about just the problems that people have sent me in terms of questions. Now, I have to say that all of these problems have solutions, and I feel a bit duty bound to tell you what the solution is, in a sense, because I see so many people on Facebook and so many people just posting stuff, and I think to myself, well, why don't you do something about it? Instead of suffering for years on end, actually work the problem. You are a problem-solving machine. Work the problem. So the secret that I've found to getting through these problems is this, and I'm going to talk about applying this. I call it active self-help CBT, and you'll find it in the system just like Anxiety Wizard, for instance. There's a 3-part structure to solving psychological problems. The first one is you determine the real problem. Okay, so if you think about sweating, pathological sweating, this gentleman would say, my problem is pathological sweating. I would say, no, your problem is maladaptive, high levels of arousal, activation of the chronic stress response, and anticipatory fear. Those are the problems that you have. You deal with those problems, the sweating will go away. The sweating is a consequence of having neural programs and processes running which create that particular problem. Likewise for anxiety, what's your problem? I'm anxious. That's not your problem. That's a consequence of your problem. Your problem is that your brain is overestimating the threat that you're under, because in fact you're not under threat. You may feel anxious, but you're not under threat. What's your problem? My problem is I worry a lot. Well, that's not really a problem, is it? The problem is that you're setting your brain questions that don't have answers, and you expect it to figure it out when it never can. That's the problem. So what do we do about it? Well, we work through a system like Anxiety Wizard where we're using self-help CBT tools that we can apply to the problem. You define a problem, you apply a tool to it, you practice that tool for long enough, which is number 3, to see change, and then you keep going. If you practice a tool for long enough to see change, you will see change. I was talking to someone today who's been using one of the worry tools, and he's found it miraculous. Within 24 hours, worry gone. And that's because he's putting some effort and attention to the actual problem, not the symptoms of the problem. So I hope that's clear, and I hope that's interesting, because it's actually just true. So just to finish off, if you want to start with Anxiety Wizard, today I've talked about generalized anxiety disorder, sweating, worry, anxiety. I've touched on health anxiety, blushing, and tinnitus. All of those will be adequately dealt with. The processes that create these problems are adequately dealt with in Anxiety Wizard. You work through that course, you're more than likely to be free of all these problems. And because I've talked about generalized anxiety disorder, I have a short course called Get on Top of GAD. And if you join Anxiety Wizard over the weekend, I'll make sure that Get on Top of GAD gets added to your library for free. So not only will you get Anxiety Wizard, which is free for the first week, and then it's less than £10 a week, so it's really, really inexpensive. You'll also get the Get on Top of GAD course free. So I hope you found this interesting. Please send me more questions to selfhelpcbt@gmail.com, and I'll be pleased to try and answer them for you. So thanks for taking the time to watch and listen.